Hello, and a very good morning to you. You're welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. We hope you're keeping well and adjusting to the new seasonal temperatures that we're all experiencing across the country. Today, we're going to be discussing bees. Farming in Ireland, as we know, has always thrived on the close relationship between our crops, livestock, and landscape in Ireland, and is home to over 100 species of bees, which play a vital role in supporting the balance, contributing to crop pollination and ecosystems health. And this morning we're delighted to be joined by Professor Grace McCormack from the University of Galway, who will be discussing the importance of the native Irish honeybee. Good morning, Grace. You're very welcome to the webinar.
Morning. Thanks a lot for having me.
Great, you're very welcome. And good morning to you, Catherine. How are you today?
Morning, all.
You had a busy week last week, Catherine, with Hedgerow Week. Lots of resources as a result.
Yeah, some good videos, and we'll be posting them out online soon. And I left up the our whole farm strategy behind me for this morning's webinar because I think it's very relevant still to what Grace is going to talk about. So
Brilliant. Thanks, Catherine. Grace, you're working in University of Galway in the west of Ireland, and how have you specialised in the bees and the native Irish honeybee? What has attracted you to this area?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm a zoologist and I'm actually an evolutionary biologist, and I have skills in molecular biology and phylogenetics, which is looking at relationships between organisms using DNA and morphology, so taxonomy and systematics. And I was approached 10 years ago by somebody looking for scientific evidence, right? And so I became aware. I had read the book A World Without Bees, so I was interested. I'm interested in conservation and stuff, but as well, I'm very interested in that speciation, subspecies boundary. That population genetics, that population species boundary. So anyway, then I became aware of the situation with honeybees in Ireland. I was surprised at the lack of research actually happening, actually even the lack of research around molecular evolution of honeybees. So, and an awful lot of assumptions being made around the honeybee. And then I realized that there was not really a lot of evidence for some of these assumptions. So that's what kind of started me. And the idea that the understanding at the time was that the Irish honeybee was extinct and wild honeybees were extinct, and I could see no evidence. And then as soon as people realize you're working on bees, you start hearing from people. And then
Mhm.
I was, all right, okay. So that's what got me started. And then I became a beekeeper, so I would understand what it was about. So I would understand what things from the beekeeper perspective. And we were also trying to drive, I'm really interested in natural selection. So we were trying to drive, we came across the whole problem of colony collapse disorder, this global issue with the collapse of honeybee colonies and the causes of those. So yeah, that's what got me started. And then I love it. I mean, it's so dynamic, I mean, I know some people hate the idea that the honeybee is kind of one of the poster childs as well as bumblebees. Members of the public love honeybees. They're really interested in the problems. And actually, although it can be a pain in some contexts for that honeybees get the attention, as long as we manage that carefully, that's also good for bringing in changes that we might like to make. So, yeah, there's good and bad things, and so maybe
Yeah,
we can talk about some of that today.
yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, so it's
That's
just
great.
very dynamic, and lots of people are interested from science to members of the public, and sure, that's great. Yeah.
Well, we're really looking forward to your presentation this morning. I might just ask you to share your slides and we can get going on that. And to remind everyone that there is a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and please do use that if you have questions that you'd like us to put to Grace at the end of her presentation. And today's session is being recorded and it will be available on the Teagasc YouTube channel and also as a podcast on all popular podcast platforms. So, Grace, we'll hand over to you and look forward to our discussion afterwards.
All right, thanks a lot. I've introduced myself already, so I don't need to belabor on this. So yeah, I just want to maybe, I guess, reiterate the point that Mark mentioned around that the honeybee is just one of many bee species in the country. And, a lot of for a lot of the species, we don't have a lot of information. They're data deficient. And in other ones, there are, with our 21 bumblebee species, we know a number of those that are endangered and vulnerable. So it's just that, yeah, we only have one honeybee species, and in some cases that allows people to dismiss the honeybee. You know, we have a honeybee, the species. Actually, globally, the honeybee is not in decline, despite colony collapse disorder and all of the issues. There are major problems. The massive collapse now of honeybees is, you hear about it in America, so there's a huge problem in the US. There's some problems in parts of Europe, but actually overall honeybee numbers are on the increase. But is that enough? So I guess this is where my interest comes in, that the honeybee is not just one thing. There are nuances, of course, around the place, around globally in different places. And I think Ireland has on one hand, a really positive story, but on the other hand, we also then should perhaps mind what we have. So again, like I'd say it out here, we could talk about it later, but there has been issues when people think about colony collapse, and then the first thing people do is go and buy colonies and bring in honeybees, because that they think that's helping biodiversity. But this has had a serious problem in elsewhere, not so much Ireland, I hope to show you, but like for example in London, people buy a lot of honeybees, and then you get a lot of starving bees because there's not enough forage. So really, what I tell people now is I don't really want any increase in intensity of beekeeping in Ireland. I wouldn't be advocating that, but what I tell people is nesting habitat and forage. So plant up your area, and not for the bees that are already there, not necessarily bringing in more honeybees. So yeah, it's a complicated, very interesting topic for me. So if I look at the honeybee species, this map kind of shows the different colors representing that within the honeybee, there's actually a lot of biodiversity contained within the species. And I know a lot of conservation management or whatever can be still focused on the species, but really we need to be looking at biodiversity and adaptation to environments, and protecting the breadth of the biodiversity contained within species. So the honeybee is a remarkably adaptive species over its evolutionary history, and there's now currently it's about 32 subspecies across this range, and they have been placed now in different lineages. Really, I suppose in terms of many of the lineages have evolved since in terms of what's happened since the Ice Age. Before and after the Ice Age. So in the Irish bees, what's affecting the Irish bees really would be the Ice Age, and after the Ice Age, we have these two lineages that have appeared. One is the M lineage, which is basically this orange and green section. There are two subspecies in the M lineage, and one is Apis mellifera mellifera, which is native to Ireland, and there's Apis mellifera iberiensis, which is native, which has actually kind of got a hybrid status as well, and is present largely in Portugal and Spain. And really the issue of concern that we would have concern about is the C lineage bees, which are like the Italian bees and the Slovakian bees. So Apis mellifera carnica and Apis mellifera ligustica, which have been separated from the M lineage for over 200,000 years. So they're very distinct, and they have very different morphology and behaviors and genetics. So the subspecies that's native to Ireland is Apis mellifera mellifera. So, and this subspecies has undergone massive decline due to a lot of intensive breeding and selection of the C lineage honeybee subspecies, Ligustica and Carnica, and also then due to the development of a buckfast bee, commercial strain, but also due to other threats, which I'll talk about later. So in terms of habitat loss, and basically, but a lot of it has been a move over to using different subspecies. So we've had two population crashes, which I'll talk about as well. So there used to be a very widespread distribution of Apis mellifera mellifera. It's known as the pioneering subspecies. It's the one that is highly adapted. It has found itself in many, many different environments, and there are lots of what we call ecotypes then that are adapted to those environments. It's the type of bee that's found itself in the first place in Americas, went to New Zealand, Australia. So it's very adaptable, but it has had a massive population crash, such that in 2014, the IUCN Red List for the honeybee has got the report says that it's data deficient. It doesn't have enough information. There was no clarity on whether honeybees lived in the wild anymore across this range. And it was actually assumed to be extinct or almost extinct throughout its entire range, including Ireland and the UK. And this is one of the assumptions that I wanted to test. So there was some indication, publication in 2005, that the bees from the Galtee bee breeding group in Tipperary, that they were Apis mellifera mellifera, and that Galtee bee breeding group has been driving conservation awareness of Apis mellifera mellifera for decades and decades. So just good news. I won't go into too much detail. Thankfully we've managed to publish a few things since we started 10 years ago. We have a lot in train. So what this slide shows is that from these two papers that we have a very significant population of pure Apis mellifera mellifera in Ireland. So this slide is essentially a massive histogram. So on the y-axis you have the probability of assignment to a population. So a probability of 1 is, if we look at it in percentages, there's 100% really confidence of placing a bee in that population. Each vertical bar here represents a single bee. So when you've got a block of color, it just means that all the bees are the same or consistent. So what we've done is collected a lot of samples in Ireland for these studies and compared them to reference populations of known subspecies in Europe. So this is in collaboration with other colleagues. So we've got Illagustica from Italy, Carnica from Austria, and then we have the Slovenian bees here as well. And then we've got a panel of reference samples of Apis mellifera mellifera. So what you can see is basically this graph is pulled from analysis of whole genome sequencing, whereby there are a number of sites in the genome that are clearly differentiate the different subspecies. So where you've got orange, a solid block of orange, it means that the bees in those blocks can be assigned using those positions in the genome, can be assigned to the C populations with a probability of 1. And likewise, if you've got a solid block of blue, the bee can be assigned to the Apis mellifera mellifera with a probability of 1. Where you get bars where there's half blue, half orange, it means it stands for a hybridized bee. So where you've got mixing between the two subtypes. So you can see in the Irish populations, both managed and free living, you've got predominantly solid blocks of blue, which means that those bees can be assigned to Apis mellifera mellifera with a probability of 1 or close to 1. And this is really important actually, because there are not many populations in Europe that can say this. So we've been doing some work then to say, okay, we proved that we have Apis mellifera mellifera in Ireland, but then the question is, well, is there anything different about the bees in Ireland that would maybe indicate that we should protect or conserve them or use them? Are they useful? And so we've been looking at how distinct the bees in Ireland are from other bees. So there is a lot of information in the grey literature. Beekeepers and beekeeper scientists have been studying this for decades. There's a really good book by Beowulf Cooper that's freely available. Really nice book of the honeybees of the British Isles. And then Rutner has been doing an awful lot of work on taxonomy, really, I suppose, of bees and understanding biology of bees across Europe. So the Irish honeybees can fly in poor weather, and this is important for mating in the summer when our weather can be very bad, particularly in July when it's raining, and also for feeding and for cleansing flights. So our bees can be active in poor weather. They're also very responsive to the weather. So if we can tell if rain is going to come because you start seeing the bees coming back to the hives. They have small colony size, and this is really important in terms of impact on other pollinators. Native Irish honeybees maintain small colonies. They have long-lived queens, and a lot of beekeepers in Ireland don't replace their queens all the time or let them be replaced naturally. So we maintain this trait, which has been lost in other subspecies that are more highly bred. They've got a very specific brood pattern. If you look on the right here, you have the Irish bees will bring in the pollen and the honey and pack it in close to the brood. So sometimes in and around the brood. So the brood are the young, so the larvae and the pupae, that's what we call brood. And so the honey you can see here on the outside, and the pollen, you can see some different colors. they will bring it in and around the brood so that it's easier and more effective to feed. As I said before, they're responsive to the environment. So the queen goes off lay when there isn't very much forage out there, and say we have a June gap in some years, and then this time of year there's just the ivy, and after that the queen will go off lay for the winter. And also in the summer times when things, so this year has been really crazy actually, when the plants aren't releasing pollen and nectar due to temperature or rain, the bees will go off lay. And sometimes people think we don't have a queen, but she's actually just stopped. And this is really important as well in terms of competition. And it's different from the invasive subspecies that are commercially sold, because they don't do that, and they produce massive colonies all year, and then they starve, so beekeepers have to feed them. But also because they make these massive colonies, if they're put out in sensitive environments like on the heather, for example, they will continue to feed and produce young, and this can cause huge competition with other pollinators. So we really strongly advocate beekeeping with native bees for that purpose. And you manage the native bees in a slightly different way then. They tend to bring in honey in short snaps, so you can seem to have nothing in your hive, and then within 2 weeks you've got 4 supers. So the honeybee is really responsive in Ireland. So I've said that already about brood breaks. And then supersedure is where the colony replaces the queen. And in Ireland and in England, well, what would have been in England, probably not anymore, but certainly now in Ireland, we have a high rate of supersedure. And what this does, the hypothesis is that bees in our Irish bees can mate locally. So the common theory is, in the continents and warmer climates, that the queen will travel a long distance to mate to avoid inbreeding. But we don't have the weather here, and queens can find it very hard to get out to mate. So what happens is that they mate locally, sometimes even within the hive. So that causes short-term inbreeding, but then the colony, when the weather gets better, they'll supersede, they'll replace that queen, make more virgin queens when the weather gets better, and they will go out and mate further away to bring back the genetic variability. So this is a really interesting trait that the other honeybees don't do. So we think that it means that it's much more that our native bee can survive in the climate that we have and continue to reproduce, whereas invasive subspecies would actually, the queens have to be brought in every year or most years to continue the beekeeping productivity. We now know that, so my student published this paper in October, we now know that the Irish bees are different morphologically from the C lineage subspecies, for example, and even from Apis mellifera mellifera populations in other places in Europe. So our bees have adapted to the climate that's here since they've kind of become isolated on arrival in Ireland. So they're smaller, they're hairier, they have a broader abdomen and shorter hind legs, which from the literature and discussing with engineers and things, it's linked to their ability to thermoregulate over winter and maintain the temperature in the hive. So they have shorter distances between the bees, and they form a small cluster that keeps warm. They're darker in colour, which has also helped to retain heat in summer months in the cooler weather here. But also they have, statistically significantly shorter leg length. They have a shortened proboscis length as well, which could be linked to the paucity of the generalist approach to the forage in Ireland, but we wouldn't place much confidence on that, because the proboscis is quite a variable trait and easily subject to selection, we think. They have longer forewings. They definitely have a different structure in the forewing, which is actually also implicated in this cubital index, which is an index created from measurements of wing venation. I won't go into it here, but so the bees have different wing structures, the Irish bees, and this may help them fly in Irish conditions, but it hasn't been proven. And they also they're hairier, so they have longer over hair length. So they are different, and we think a lot of it is probably due to adaptation. As well, they're distinct genetically. So recent work, this is just a picture of a network. So it shows the relatedness between honeybees of different populations based on whole genome sequencing, so allele frequencies of whole genome sequence data. And what we basically seen is these this red to yellow group here are the C lineage bees, so Ligustica and Carnica populations, and all of these other bees are the Apis mellifera populations from different countries. These are the Swiss bees here, both the conservation areas and the selection areas. And then we have Denmark, and we have Russia, the Portuguese Apis mellifera iberiensis, which I think Irish bees share evolutionary history, much like other Iberian fauna. There's a relationship there. These are the Isle of Man bees, which are probably most closely related. So what we have is a distinct cluster here of Apis mellifera from Ireland, and then this group here in green and orange are hybridized bees. So the hybridization is pulling them out and closer to other European populations. And then these green ones, which are pure Irish bees, are Donegal bees. And they seem to have a very interesting evolutionary history, more closely aligned with other European bees. That there's a history of importation in Donegal that's different from the rest of Ireland. So very interesting, intriguing relationships going on there. That was the work of a PhD student of mine, which we're submitting for publication. And this is another paper that it's a collaboration with European colleagues. Vanessa Hummel, that manuscript is being prepared for submission as well. There's a 40,000 SNP chip, so available for honeybees. So this is where they have, you can look at 70,000 sites across the genome that have been defined by other studies as being relevant for different things. So in terms of behavior or honey production, varroa resistance, these are SNPs that over 4,000 sites across the genome that have been interrogated for differentiating the different lineages. So what we see, this is the Apis mellifera lineages, and what you can see here is that there are actually 3 groupings across Europe, and Ireland is one of those groupings. The other one is a Scandinavian grouping, and there is another European grouping, but Ireland is distinctive, or Irish bees are distinctive from anywhere else in Europe. So we have very distinctive bees. So what I wanted to kind of move on to now is in general, honeybees, they have a unique position in honeybees, that they are both regarded as a wild and domesticated species. They're the only animal species that have this distinction. But really, I suppose I would like to say they're first and foremost a wild species that people have then managed for their own benefit. They're not, unlike other domesticated animals that you would be used to, they're not fully domesticated. We don't control their forage and we don't control their mating. So we basically put them in boxes and try and get honey from them, and propolis and wax and so on. But the bees are kind of doing their own thing. Certainly in Ireland, there are some strains that are very highly bred, and you might call them truly domesticated, because everything is controlled by, artificial insemination and feeding and everything. But in Ireland, the bees are not in that context at all. There's very little of that level going on. Just to give you an idea of the beekeeping, the managed cohort in Ireland, the numbers of beekeepers, according to FIBCA, are about 3,000 beekeepers that are registered to associations that are kind of governed through the Federation of the Irish Beekeepers Associations, which is the biggest group in Ireland. The Irish Beekeeping Association then broke off from FIBCA, and they have about 1,500 members in their grouping. And then there's another new one, the Irish Beekeepers Foundation, that has fewer members. Again, it's very new. The census in 2019 suggests that there were, just over 4,500 beekeepers. So those numbers are fairly aligned, actually. And the census for Ireland in terms of the numbers of hives in Ireland is around 27,000. So that number varies a lot. We would say, so it's actually of that number then, in terms of 4,500 beekeepers, we would suggest there's rumors going around and generally accepted that there might be the same again number that aren't registered to anything, either to DAFM or any association. They don't like the politics. They're afraid of the taxman. They don't register for anything. But of course, since they're unregistered, by default, we don't know how many there are. Of the ones that are registered, most of the beekeepers are actually very, very small hobbyist beekeepers. The number here ranges from 60% ish of beekeepers only have, fewer than 3 colonies. 15% might have between 10 and 50, 3% over 50, but there are only 5 beekeepers ish in the country that have more than 150 hives. And most of those have like maybe around between 1 and 200 hives. There's, I think, 2 beekeepers that have 600 hives. The unfortunate thing about it is that we know that a higher proportion of these beekeepers have imported invasive subspecies. So they have a large impact on local beekeeping and on local pollinators. So because we suspect that there's more beekeepers than we think, we work on both managed and wild colonies. So we've this year have run a census in Donegal in Inishowen. My PhD student Mick Versbow, he's from Boomtree Bees, used to make log hives, and I'm delighted she's doing a PhD with me now. We did a census run by either Beekeeper Survey and communicating with associations in Inishowen and Donegal by word of mouth and beelining. So once we did the media and released the survey, people tend to contact Mick. He's out on the ground talking to people. And what we find from this, so if you see, so the blue here, this blue and the orange are basically beekeepers affiliated with associations. And then the green and this light blue are beekeepers that are not associated with any association. So you can see that at least half the beekeepers that we have, we're fairly confident that we have got most people. We also did some beelining this year where we went looking for colonies based from the forage. So we've done plant pollinator networks. So we're doing a lot of that to really look at what's on the ground. And we found other managed colonies that we hadn't known about. So it's a really nice method for finding those hiding in different places. But this is, now we can assume really that this is the same, which we think across the country. Donegal would have been a place of low density. It's still low density, so we reckon there's about 160 colonies, managed colonies, and 51 beekeepers. The average number of colonies held by these beekeepers is still very, very low. So the intensity of apiculture is very low. There are some pockets like Cork, Dublin, Tipperary, Wexford have high density. So most of the beekeepers, over 50% of beekeepers in Ireland, are thought to come from these few locations. And then the density of beekeeping in the rest of the country is fairly low. We plan to do more census in other places to test this, but our work now so far would indicate that the rumours are true. But compared to other countries, Ireland has far lower density of commercial or hobbyist beekeepers or colonies. So the picture here on the left is showing the percentage of professional beekeepers across Europe. And sorry, you can't read the text very easily. It's fewer than 2% of beekeepers in the yellow zone are commercial or professional beekeepers. And it's true that Chaussee et al. In 2013, based on the EU data, say that fewer than 10% of Irish beekeepers are commercial, but commercial in Ireland is very different to commercial in Europe. So commercial beekeepers in Ireland, as you've seen, have got, normally about 100 to 200 colonies, 250 maybe. There's very, very few who've got the numbers of colonies like 600. And 600 colonies for a beekeeper would be very small time beekeeper in the US or in many countries in Europe. So by comparison, again, this number we know now is half what we would expect it to be in Ireland, because Ireland, we're very bad at registering. We have a very bad, I would say, relationship with beekeepers. Government does, and there's a lot of work needing to be done to reassure beekeepers and get them registered. But in comparison, the 70,000 beekeepers in Italy, France, 89,000 in Germany, 40,000 in the UK. So really a lot of the situations to do with honeybees are from papers published elsewhere, and they just don't apply to Ireland. And we have a lot of work to do in Ireland. The graph on the right is just showing again the numbers of beekeepers from Stephen's PhD thesis. The numbers of beekeepers and the numbers of hives would indicate that the majority of beekeepers in Ireland have very few hives. Irish beekeepers, a survey we carried out, published in 2023, suggests that around 90% of beekeepers keep Apis mellifera mellifera. So that's nice, but we do have about 10% beekeepers that are bringing in invasive subspecies or commercial strains from abroad. Beekeepers in Ireland are very interested in conservation and on the bees themselves, and this is really encouraging. And I think this is why we've managed to maintain such a significant population of Apis mellifera mellifera in Ireland, is because beekeepers are interested for different reasons. So these were the proportion of beekeepers that ranked these situations as being important, ranking from 1 to 5 as being important. So we have a lot of beekeepers that think or know that the black bee is the best bee for their environment, and that's why they keep the black bee. Also because the black bee was already in their area, so that we do have, and it's really nice to see that in Ireland already they know that local bees are better. And this is now proven scientifically across Europe and the US, that local bees perform better from a production point of view as well. And Irish beekeepers are ahead of the curve. And again, conservation is really important to Irish beekeepers to conserve and protect what we have in Ireland already. So this is really encouraging, and I think it's really, really good for the biodiversity side of the house that you're onto a winner with engaging with beekeepers, because most beekeepers in Ireland already have small holdings. There's a lot of farmers that are beekeeping, are interested, and if they're aware already of the issues, then it's only positive. A lot of traits of interest to beekeepers, but of those, so this is if you score, we ask them to score the traits that are more interesting, from 1 is least important to 5 is most important. And you can see brood health here is the most important trait. Also gentleness is probably the second most important trait, and varroa resistance. Other traits that are more important then are calmness, so that's linked again, gentleness and docility, pure race, and genetic diversity. So beekeepers want native bees, but they also are aware that genetic diversity is important, and they're not interested in a lot of them aren't interested in significant instrumental insemination that could reduce that genetic diversity. What's less important, interesting, honey production and low swarming behavior are they're still really important, slightly less important than those other traits for beekeepers. So beekeepers, we find, are more interested, they would be interested in a bee that's varroa resistant or productive, but only if they are local and black. They're not interested in importing bees, most beekeepers, to drive these traits. We do have a threat, major threat, and a concern to Irish bees, and this is introgression. So this is where imports of non-native bees, introgression is when an import of invasive subspecies comes in, mates with the current population, right? And then the next generation, so the hybrid bees, back cross into the native population, and that's when introgression happens. So the genes of the invasive subspecies are now present in the population. So my student published this, this is the same paper in last October, and there seems to be there's an increase observed by beekeepers of hybridized bees. This is borne out by the work we have done, in that around 25% of the colonies, of over 500 colonies we sampled, show signs of introgression. Thankfully, most of them are very, very low levels of introgression, but about 8% of the colonies we sampled are really significantly hybridized. We don't see too many native queen lineages in the population. They're not as common, which suggests that the queens, not invasive subspecies queens, are not surviving very well in the population against a well-adapted local bees. And it's the non-native drones, when the bees are imported, the drones are allowed to fly, they're mating with queens, and we're seeing that picked up in the population. So the second cohort that we have, and actually I didn't bring my phone, so I'm hoping that I'm okay on time. The wild honeybee cohort, we do have
A couple of minutes left, Grace.
Oh, got a couple. Okay, I better go faster. We have a reporting tool now for wild honeybees. We have identified a large population of wild honeybees in Ireland. We're monitoring a lot of them. They're living a lot in buildings and trees, but we have over 750 nests that are currently reported. We are monitoring survival of these, and the Irish bees that are in the wild are surviving. So the green there means bees that are surviving. The red lines are ones that have died out. So of course we get ones that are died out, maybe 10 to 20%, and the rest are surviving year on year. I'll skip this one. This is showing just an example of one in Garyland's bat house in Garyland's Park near Cool Park, run by NIBS or an MPWS. So this graph is just showing you that we've now proven using genomics that wild bees can survive in the wild. So they're not just swarms that die out every year. So just from a color perspective, the dark reds are colonies where we've shown that across years that we can identify that it's the daughter of the original queen that's there. The other pink are granddaughters and great-granddaughters, and the greys are where we expect unrelated. So we see a picture here of colonies that have died out in the wild and colonies that are surviving in the wild. And we are seeing no significant difference between free-living colonies and managed colonies in the presence or absence of most of the common pests and pathogens. So that's a really important point as well. The wild colonies are not a reservoir of disease for the managed colonies. We have two projects going on at the moment. One, the NAP is the National Apiculture Programme, and Freebee is a European project whereby for the apiculture programme, we are performance testing varroa-resistant colonies from our apiary. We don't treat our bees for varroa or other diseases. And we have 8 other beekeepers around the country that are treatment free, and we're gathering data on the survival and performance of those non-treated colonies. And then we've also collected swarms from the wild for bees that we know, colonies that we know have survived in the wild. We've collected swarms, put them in boxes, and we're looking at those for the same type of data to look at how well they survive and how well they produce honey and how they perform. So that I guess the idea of this is that these are good stock for beekeepers, and that we can move away, that evolution has occurred enough that we now are seeing resistance to the parasites in Ireland. And linking on from that, the main impacts on Irish honeybees have been population crashes, 2 major population crashes, one around the time of World War I, which was put down to something called the Isle of Wight disease, but it's a much more complex cause that led to the idea that honeybees went extinct, the native honeybees went extinct. We also have a massive loss of habitat and hybridization. That picture here is showing hybridized bees, where you see this orange color on the bees. That's an indication of hybridization. And of course, we have issues with pesticides. The other major issue is the pests and diseases. So the varroa mite came into Ireland in 1998 and surely caused a massive population crash. And then most beekeepers have been treating with chemicals since that time to control the mite. But a growing population of beekeepers in Ireland are not treating now. They're monitoring for varroa, and we find that the bees have developed resistance. We now, of course, have the Asian hornet has arrived in Ireland, so that's a major concern. And a bigger concern is Tropicalaps mite. So that Asian hornet comes in with general traffic, but the Tropicalaps mite is another risk that will come in with imported invasives. So these are massive impacts on the Irish population. So that slide just summarizes what I've said. We have a distinct ecotype. Ireland is a really important population now for Apis mellifera in Europe. We have surviving free-living colonies that are a really good resource for beekeepers. Apiculture is different from other places. We have a much lower density, a much more aware beekeeping fraternity. Most of them, we do have some beekeepers that do what they want and destroy things for other people. We do have increased varroa resistance emerging. And also then just the last slide is just that really, I suppose, because I'm talking to a Teagasc and a group of agriculturally minded people, I'm hoping that really just to say the apiculture is seriously underdeveloped in Ireland. We don't have any good infrastructure. There's huge potential, I think, in the population, and in this, even from a commercial point of view. Very, very little selective breeding happening. Huge potential in our subspecies because they're not highly bred. Would benefit hugely. There's a huge amount of work to be done. Would benefit hugely from the expertise that's available in Teagasc and partners and people involved with Teagasc, because what we really need is to provide enough native queens for the local population to really that people don't have to go online and buy buy bees from abroad. If we could breed quality Irish honeybees here, and get the infrastructure to do that and the expertise, that would be amazing, I would think. So just to say, this is collaborative work. It's not all my own work, and we collaborate with a lot of people. And the Native Irish Honeybee Society provided funding when nobody else would, but we have funding from across the board. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Grace. That was a whistle-stop tour. Huge amount of information there, and lots of people inquiring about your slides, whether they'll be available, or the presentation. And yes, it will be available on our YouTube channel afterwards. So that'll be available in the next few
Yeah, I'm
days.
sorry I had to go very fast. It's a massive story. There's so much happening, and that is only the tip of the iceberg about what's happening actually. And sorry if I went very fast and covered a lot, but I think it's important to kind of put some of that out there, that this is happening.
Well, the beauty is people can listen back and on the podcast, and I think it's definitely something, because you've covered so much information, you really would want to listen back to some areas. Could I ask, Grace, if you could just stop sharing your screen there, and we can start looking at some of our questions. Lots of questions coming in there, Catherine, from our audience this morning.
Absolutely. Lots on beekeeping, but I'll just start off on another, on the other side. What about the solitary bee? Are they not the real heroes? So just
Yeah, I mean, and really we need more research on our solitary bees. I mean, I came into this from a different perspective, and certainly it's something that I could also apply our systematic and our expertise on. But yes, solitary bees, no way would I underestimate the importance of solitary bees. And actually our pollinator network work that we've been doing during the summer really shows that as well. So yes, 100%. We shouldn't be putting all our efforts into one basket. I'm not saying that. In fact, I'm saying the opposite, in that, I'm saying that our Irish honeybee is really important, but it's actually, we probably are where we are in some ways because of the attention of beekeepers and the neglect, actually, from a commercial point of view. So our solitary bees, yes, are really important. Yeah.
Very good. So yeah, and I think we have webinars before with Una Fitzpatrick on the solitary bees and the bumblebees, and I think it's good just not to mix the two up. So that's
Absolutely.
So back to the beekeeping. Lots of questions there. Well, sorry, one question first of all about how is the native honeybee truly part of the native fauna here for the 10,000 years, or were they introduced long ago?
No, it's accepted now that honeybees came to Ireland naturally, along with other winged insects, after the last ice age. As the ice receded, and the tree line moved forward, and there was a land bridge between Europe and England, and everything came across to England. The jury's still out as to whether it was an actual land bridge or not between Ireland and England, and possibly not, but that the distance was so short that quite a lot of fauna, well, that's why we have a depauperate fauna in Ireland compared to England, right, partly, but that the honeybee came across at that time. There's also there's no archaeological specimens of bees, but there's a lot of archaeological evidence of the presence of bees. Like, for example, in archaeological digs from 3,000, 4,000 years ago, like even in Donegas, and archaeologists would say that that is indication that bees were actually here and being used and bred here. It's also true that people brought bees. The first written evidence of that was 500 AD, and there's a lot of reports there. So another way of looking at bees being native is that they're part of our culture, our heritage, and so they're part of our language. Milsean, meal, clonmel, all of these things, they're been used in the Book of Kells. So all of this would indicate that yes, that it's now accepted that honeybees are part of our native fauna.
So following on from that then, why is the native Irish honeybee not recognised as a rare species by any conservation bodies such as ICUN?
So actually, I meant to say that is that in 2014, the IUCN deal with wild bees, wild species, and in 2014, it was not known as to whether the honeybee existed as a wild species anymore, whether we as people had made it extinct. We've just done, I've been a member of the team that are doing the updated report, the IUCN Red List for bees, which has now been approved by the IUCN and is expected to be released in October. And here we designate the honeybee as endangered in Europe. So National Parks and Wildlife did not believe neither did DAFM, that native honeybees existed anymore in Ireland, and now we've proven they do. The IUCN have now accepted that the honeybee is an endangered species, and National Parks and Wildlife Service are becoming more aware. So we're working with national parks and service. So yes, it's now known to be an endangered species, and our population in Ireland is now really important from not only an Irish perspective, but a European perspective and a global perspective. But AMM is not native outside of Europe, so we're only thinking about Europe.
Okay, so now back to the beekeeping. Lots of questions on the beekeeping side of it. What's your opinion on bees kept by the many corporates in Ireland? I know some hives of the native variety, but is this still potentially impacting on the 21 bumblebees?
Yeah, I mean, we've been asked to put bees on roofs. We always refuse, and we suggest that companies will provide nesting, provide forage. That's the best thing that corporates can do to support pollinators. So we think that putting hives in these places will put competitive pressure on wild pollinators, but also on beekeepers. So beekeepers are quite careful in some way. A lot of beekeepers are very careful, and they will assess where is the best place to put an apiary and look at the forage. And this is something we're advocating now, is the sustainability. We're looking at the sustainability of our own apiary and the impact. So beekeepers, we advocate only putting a very low number of hives in any place. And most beekeepers are very good at that. Some beekeepers will say, yeah, and they're after it for the money. So I would be saying no to corporates. And if you're going to be putting hives in cities and things like that, there's foraging gardens and stuff. Sometimes they can be surprising amount of forage, but generally it's a bad idea.
And
Because
when you mentioned there planting, a question about fuchsia, which we know is not native, and so what do you recommend for planting? Do you recommend native species?
Yeah, and actually in Donegal, when we were beelining, it was horrific the amount of Himalayan balsam that was all over the place in Donegal. And actually, the bees were using it, and it's bad because even though you might look and say it's pretty and it's obviously it's a forage for bees, but actually the nectar is not good nectar. And if the bees are feeding on it because they seem to be addicted to it, but if what they're collecting is not good for the colony, if it's poorer in resources that the colony needs and they adapt to it, that is really bad, actually. So a native where possible, we all make the mistake actually of doing that. And honeybees are using fuchsia. We see a lot at the moment they're using fuchsia. So no, I mean I think they're all adapted to our native plants. And these these plants sound good, but actually Himalayan balsam is taken over in Donegal. It's running through the hedgerows, and we see as well the Montbretia and fuchsia. They take over. They not only are maybe producing the wrong nutrients for the pollinators that are feeding on them, but they're blocking out. They're competing with the native flora and is actually reducing the amount of native flora that's available for the bees. So yeah, it's.
Okay. Mark, I'll just run through a few quick ones here.
Of
Maybe
course,
you
yeah.
can. How long can a queen typically live?
Um, so 3 to 5 years. 5-year queen will be an old queen, but I had a 5-year-old queen this year, that was replaced. That's done it. But 3 years, and then for production, if you want honey, you'd be advocating maybe changing them after 2 years. A queen will reduce in productivity. Yeah.
Your comparison across countries of density of beekeepers, you said 2,200 in Ireland. Is that expressed in absolute terms or as head of population? It's absolute, isn't it?
Absolute terms that came from the EU census. Those numbers came from that census. So these are absolute numbers of
So the
beekeepers.
higher numbers I remember some of the countries there, obviously they're bigger countries with more people.
Yes, and also probably better registration, mandatory registration, and things like that.
Would maybe the suggestion is it better to express it
Oh
as,
yeah,
either per area or per
yeah,
person?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Would
Yeah,
we still be very low?
I think so, but you're right, and it's also in terms of numbers of colonies. So, yeah, that data is hard to get, and I'm only starting to look at that now. But yes, this I think that's really important to show. So there's two things. I think there are fewer. Beekeeping is harder in Ireland. It's not easy in Ireland. So the numbers of colonies per beekeeper would also be much lower. So Yeah. But yeah, maybe come back with that data down the line. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion anyway.
Good
Well,
question. Yeah.
can you suggest where to buy an AM, the native swarm? He has hives and wants to make sure they get the right bee. So who do you contact? Where do you buy them?
So it depends what you want. So the Native Irish Honeybee Society have a list of suppliers. Also then your local beekeeping association. So it's better to get local bees. So talk to your local association about who's selling bees, and also look at we can provide. Well, we want is looking around to see where swarms are gathering. So what I would suggest, if you want to go treatment free and you're looking at that side of thing as well, is collect wild swarm from not from a beekeeper necessarily, because they could be quite weak, susceptible bees that they're propping up, but finding a wild colony, collecting a swarm there, and keeping it separate in a separate apiary for a while until you see about disease and all of that. But that's a really good stock that most beekeepers in Ireland are using, is collecting local swarms.
And just a comment, Mark, and then I'll come back to you. A person keeping bees near Clifton assumed they were the only one in the area, and then to the surprise, there was 8 more beekeepers within 10 kilometres, and none of them are registered. So just an interesting comment there.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's something we'll start publishing on and start. So we do plan to write to local newspapers and stuff and try and get a handle on that. But we plan to do more census. But yeah, there's a good club, Connemara Beekeeping Association. But yes, a lot of non-registration going on. Yeah, and Connemara is
Well,
hard to keep bees as well. It's even harder than some
yeah.
other places, So
Yeah, the conditions I'd say are, well, lots of fuchsia out there. I'm sure, and there's good feeding for bees out there. And actually, this question here is asking, what are the best things to plant to attract and feed native bees? And I suppose maybe we're not necessarily targeting that particular species as such, because we want broader biodiversity. But in terms of agricultural crops, are there particular crops that are most appealing?
Well, I would actually go to the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. I mean,
Mm.
and get the advice there. They have advice and support for all walks of life, and I can't you know give that any higher praise. So I would go to the people who know best and go to the All Ireland Pollinator Plan website and have a look and follow their advice.
And I think, Mark, that the stunning result out of them came that the most visited plant was the dandelion.
That's so important for early stuff. Yeah, absolutely. The
Great.
hawthorn. So there are major crops for honeybees, but again, honeybees are not the most important. Clover is really, really important. White clover be really important. Bramble is really important. So the hedgerow plants and the normal bog standard things that you wouldn't even look at. But yeah, clover and herbs. So the new kind of uh, planting for fields rather than just the grasses. The mixed seed packets are really good then, not just for, aren't they? No, well, not well.
Well,
Okay.
not yeah, not the
Anyway,
wildflowers, obviously, yeah.
no,
But
not the wildflower one. I'm
no, no,
talking.
no. I knew you may. I didn't mean
Yeah, yeah.
that. Yeah,
So
yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
that's veering outside my expertise. Actually, I'm an
Yeah,
evolutionary biologist, not an ecologist. So Catherine would answer those questions, or the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, better than I ever would. Yeah.
that's fair enough, and we might put in some links there for that as
Yeah.
well. Actually, um, how many managed hives would an average 100-acre farm support comfortably? There's a question just come in from somebody.
Well, it depends on the nature of the farm. I mean, the
Yeah.
first thing you do is you walk the farm and you look at what's available throughout the year cycle as well, not just in the summer. So you're looking at an extended forage, so the dandelion and hawthorn and stuff, early the trees, some of the early trees are really important for bees, and then right out to the ivy. So some places don't have as much ivy as we do in the west. So I would be looking and getting somebody down to have a look with you, and looking at shelter is important, and all of that. And also depending then on the forage and the shelter, you'd want to be thinking about, not overpopulating. So bees, if you put too many hives in a place, they stress each other out as well. There's competition between the
Mm.
hives. And actually my apiary, I really stressed this year, because we lost an apiary and I have too many hives in my apiary, and I can see it in the bees. So I have a beekeeper that I would advocate only 3 colonies in any one spot, and
Mhm.
and positioned in a way that they're not actually seeing each other and stuff. They'll rob each other out. It'll cause loads of problems if you put too many hives in any one area. Never mind competition to other wild pollinators. You're gonna cause problems to your bees.
But I think that's a super answer to kind of, it depends what's there. Like, again, look at the screen behind me. That 100 acres could be
Yeah.
in one field. The 100
Yeah.
acres could have short back and side hedges.
Yeah.
So we need to get to our whole farm strategy where half our hedges are left grow wild and free and untrimmed unless needed. And the chopped hedges need to contain the clump as shown behind me. And I think that's where we work so well with the beekeepers, because what they want is what we want for biodiversity. All done
And
right, obviously, yeah.
yeah, and bigger margins as well,
Yeah, yeah,
bigger
our
margins
grass
at the
margin,
edges of fields are
absolutely.
really important. Yeah.
Huge amount of compliments coming in here, Grace, about your presentation. People looking for the recording and the slides. So we'll definitely, they'll be available up on the Teagasc YouTube channel over the next coming
And
days.
actually, sorry, Mark, before, can I just say that the National Apiculture Programme are joining us on the Teagasc stand at the ploughing.
Yeah.
So for beekeeping queries,
And I'll be there on a day. I'll be there on one of the days as well, the 17th or 18th, one of those. And we can provide Catherine. The National Apiculture is doing some nice stuff. We have a newsletter, Instagram, Facebook page, and my group are kind of leading on the education and communication. And we would love more interactions. And so I will share all those links. And we're generating a newsletter around the apiculture program that we will send to Catherine. I guess that might be good when it comes out in PDF for circulation and things.
That'd be
well, I just think
great.
it's something our rural development
Oh yeah,
grouping, Mark in Teagasc could take over, because, as I say, from
keeping
a
up.
not, yeah,
Great.
while we don't recommend keeping bees from a biodiversity point of view, they're integral to as an alternative enterprise on the farm. And as I
Yeah.
said, our particular interest in them is what's good for them is also good for the wild bees.
And I think just to say quickly that many of our beekeepers keep bees because it's part of their culture. Their grandparents or their parents or their
Yeah,
uncle, and they have had a hive down the back of the garden, and they are aware of it. And some people really like that and have bees for that. They have bees for the bees themselves, not for the honey. Um, and we're running the apiculture diploma now in the university for the last 4 years, and we run an entomology module, and we've a lot of the people have small holdings, or they might a couple might be a farmer, and then the partner is wants to do something else. They're interested in alternative sources of protein and bits and bobs, but they're interested in the bees themselves, and they're interested in biodiversity. So it's not the perception of beekeepers driving massive colonies for honey production. That's really not the vibe I get from beekeepers in Ireland. They're much different. And so, but anyway, so yeah, it's an important part of cultural heritage and rural development. It's a few quid. The taxman is only interested in anything over 10 grand. So this it allows people to bring in a few thousand euro into their pockets.
Great. Well, look, um, it's it's an area that I think you need to know what you're at, but there's a great network out there
Yeah.
with beekeeping clubs around the country. So I think that's probably a good idea for people to reach out if they are interested. And as you said, the Irish Native Beekeepers Association, is that the correct
Native Irish
title?
Honeybee Society.
Honeybee
Yeah.
Society. People can look that up. Before we let you go, just want to remind everybody that next week is the ploughing in Tullamore this year, and we do want to welcome you all to the Teagasc marquee and exhibit. We're at Block 4, Row 13, Stand 267. You can't miss us. We're more or less in the centre there beside the Department of Agriculture. There are lots of interesting exhibits there and information, and you get to meet our advisors and our specialists. So do come along and pay us a visit. We'd be delighted to see you. Grace, thanks so much for your presentation this morning. Really enjoyed it, and we look forward to hearing more of this, the really excellent research that you're conducting there in the university in Galway. Catherine, thanks so much for assisting with questions, and to Cathal in the background on the technical side this morning. Until next week, we're going to be joined by Dr. Fiona Brennan, who is going to be talking to us about citizen science for soil health. So really looking forward to Fiona's presentation next week. So until then, enjoy the weekend, and we might even get to see you down at the ploughing. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
See you
Bye-bye.
guys. Bye. Bye.